every time Colt turned his head, he saw something new, something he had never imagined. Each sight seemed more confusing and wonderful than the last. At the moment, he was watching a man in a red striped suit and impossibly long legs bend over to hand a balloon to a girl who was about his age. The man was so high in the air that her head barely reached his knees. The girl gleefully accepted the balloon, while Colt was left surprised and a little disappointed that the man didn't topple over. His attention shifted to a boy holding what looked like a pinkish cloud larger than his own head. Colt barely had time to guess what the fibrous fluff could be before the boy tore off a piece and bit directly into it. Stunned, Colt's attention was again pulled away as a group of men marched into view. Some carrying large brass horns on their shoulders and others holding smaller ones to their mouths, swaying with the rhythm of their tune. Colt had never heard anything like it before. The rhythm was upbeat and entirely foreign, but he found himself bobbing his head to the beat. The only music Colt had ever heard before came from the men singing in the factories near the orphanage. Singing wasn't allowed in the Bright Stars orphanage. Mistress Blythe saw to that. So the sight of children laughing and men creating music, not only with their voices but with loud instruments, came as quite a shock to Colt. Beyond the band, he glimpsed the head of a giraffe passing by in the distance. But more immediate was the enormous tent towering over him. Its red and white stripes stretched high. The entrance was flanked by large painted canvases, one showing an elephant balancing a ball on the tip of its trunk, the other depicting a man blowing fire from his mouth. Above the entrance, a banner read, "Come experience the new century, a wonderful future of light and locomotion." Just below, the year 1900 was encircled in stars. Colt was so accustomed to the order and the forced silence of the orphanage's gray stone walls that the tent's vibrant colors, the music, and the children's laughter struck him as strangely odd, almost taboo. Colt shuffled along with the other children in the slow-moving line, waiting for their turn to enter the circus tent. Usually, waiting was the bane of his existence, but the spectacle surrounding him was so interesting that he was actually grateful for the slow pace. Like always, he was forced to stand next to the headmistress. Colt knew the rules. He knew exactly how to behave and exactly how to get into trouble, so he almost surprised himself at what he did next. Almost, but not quite. A little ways off from the line, he spotted a concession stand selling candy and souvenirs. While he was trying to see the items from afar, a boy turned around holding what had to be a bar of chocolate. The boy wasted no time tearing the wrapper off and taking a large bite, breaking it off into his mouth. Without thinking, Colt pointed directly at the boy and exclaimed, "Chocolate." He immediately knew he'd made a mistake, and the ever-vigilant Mistress Blythe was not one to miss an opportunity to administer punishment. She glared down at Colt from her large shoulders and lumpy face and coldly asked, "What was the rule we agreed to before I hauled you out to this accursed freak show?" Not to speak, not even if spoken to. Her voice grew sharp. "Now give your hand." By now, Colt knew not to hesitate or even flinch. He stoically extended his hand like an old soldier worn out by war. And she brought down 2 swift cracks with her wooden rod on the back of his hand. Although Colt did his best to ignore the pain, he always felt compelled to inspect the marks left by the rod. Faint lines from his last mistake were still visible, and these new ones would form a painful double X across the back of his hand. It wasn't uncommon for Blythe to mumble her disdain for the children under her breath, but this time, Colt could actually make out what she was saying. Perhaps it was the cacophony of the circus, or maybe she simply didn't care, but she didn't bother to keep her voice down as she muttered to herself, "And I knew this would be a nightmare. Also Mr. Baird, virtuous patron of orphans, could stroke his pride. He sends a smiling servant to inform me that admission has been paid, the tickets are waiting, while I'm stuck wrangling the imps." Just as Blythe finished her not-so-private diatribe, Colt's attention was struck by yet another sight, a girl. She was a few years older than him, maybe 10 or 11. It wasn't just her lovely face or golden hair that captivated him, it was everything about her. She wore a green and white plaid dress with brass buckles fastening the shoulder straps, and Colt guessed it must have come from the store that very day. Her hair, though curly, was perfectly in order, and she was licking something the other children had called a lollipop. There was something about her that didn't seem possible, as if she had just stepped out of a department store catalog. More than that, she was with two adults who Colt immediately recognized as her parents. The mother was just as lovely and elegantly dressed as the girl, while the father was simple dressed yet clean-cut. The father spoke to her, and she looked up at him in a way that reminded Colt that he would never have a father, or a mother, or clean clothes, or chocolate. Colt had Mistress Blythe, the other orphans, filthy second-hand school uniforms, porridge every morning, and cabbage every night. Soon the curly-haired girl noticed Colt staring at her. For a moment, she held his gaze, but then she seemed uncomfortable. Her eyes revealed a mixture of pity and fear, before quickly turning her head and clutching her father's hand. Her response didn't surprise Colt. In fact, he found it perfectly rational, but still, it tore at him. As Colt finally crossed the threshold of the tent entrance, it took his eyes a moment to adjust from the bright sunlight outside to the tent's warm, dim glow. The red and white stripes filtered the light, casting everything in a soft, surreal hue. The loud music and laughter from outside gave way to the constant hum of 100 different conversations, each one blending into a quiet roar. "Up you go, top row, section 3, no dawdling," the headmistress barked, nudging a boy ahead of her with her rod. As Colt ascended the bleachers, he felt and heard the wooden planks creak underfoot as they climbed higher and higher. When they reached the top row, Blythe ordered the children to sit, arranging them like chess pieces in strict line across the back row. The children complied without question, even Colt, who had no to push the mistress. Just as he sat down, Colt heard Mistress Blank call out in a tone somewhere between a yell and a whisper, "James, what are you doing down there? Get up here this instant." Colt was startled to see James, one of the older children, standing below him at ground level, shaking his head in defiance. James was no angel, but outright defiance of Mistress Blythe was nearly unheard of, especially from one of the older children. The children sitting in the top row of the bleachers watched, transfixed, as Blythe stomped down each step, her heavy frame sending vibrations through bleachers. Colt didn't turn his head when the child next to him whispered, "Oh no." Mistress Blythe must have realized that she had an audience because, surprisingly, she didn't immediately lash out. Instead, she grasped James by the arm with what could almost pass as gentleness. Colt watched them exchange a few tense words, and then Blythe blurted out one word loud enough for all to hear. "Heights?" It was rare to see Blythe show mercy or patience to any of the children, her imps, as she liked to call them. But there she was, pulling James up the steps with only a fraction of her usual severity. When they finally reached the top, James looked terrified, clutching his seat as though he might slip through the gaps, his wide eyes fixed on the circular stage below. Fear wasn't the only expression on James's face. He had the look of an orphan who had given up hope, a look Colt had seen too many times. Colt felt a flicker of shame, realizing that he was glad Blythe's attention was elsewhere, even if it meant James was suffering. Since Colt had been at the back of the line with Mistress Blythe, he now found himself at the end of the row with a little breathing room. He leaned forward, taking in the sights below. The tent's massive ceiling stretched above him like a painted sky, the red and white stripes reaching upwards to a single point at the top. To his back, one of the red stripes of the tent was casting a red glow over Colt and everyone around him. The scent of popcorn drifted through the air, mingling with the faint aromas of sawdust and animal musk. Pleasant or unpleasant, every new smell and sight was a thrill to Colt. Suddenly, a loud bang sounded from below, and smoke billowed around the ring. A single spotlight illuminated the center, revealing the ringmaster wearing a gleaming red suit. He held a top hat in one hand, bowing to the audience as they clapped and cheered. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome not only to the greatest show in England, but to the greatest show in the world. Allow yourself to be delighted by the most exotic creatures of the earth and marvels of the new century." As the ringmaster finished his opening line, he raised a glass jar above his head, attached to a hose of some kind. After a dramatic pause, he proclaimed, "A future of light and locomotion," just as the jar began to shine brightly, earning cheers from the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome not only to the greatest show in England, but to the greatest show in the world. Allow yourselves to be delighted by the most exotic creatures of the earth and the marvels of the new century," the man announced, his voice filling the tent effortlessly. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Colt found himself clapping along, a quick burst of excitement breaking through his usual reserve. He glanced over at Blythe, wondering if she'd seen, but she was too busy scolding the boy beside her, who clutched his knees and looked ready to faint. "Sit up straight and don't fidget," she snapped, her face twisted in irritation. Colt looked back toward the center ring, grateful for this small window of freedom. One by one, the performers emerged. First came 3 strong men in simple black shorts, flexing their muscles and lifting heavy weights. Colt watched in awe as one of the men began lifting the other 2 stacked on his shoulders, and then a woman in a sparkly headdress climbed atop them. The strong man hoisted all 3 into the air, drawing roars from the crowd. Next, a troupe of acrobats swung down from above, flipping through the air with effortless grace. Colt watched in fascination, admiring the way they moved smoothly between ropes. He was surprised when the crowd gasped in fear. To him, it simply looked like fun. After the acrobats, a man covered head to toe in fur leapt into the ring, bowing and turning to show off his strange, hairy appearance. Colt was less impressed by the wild man, but his interest returned when the man introduced another performer who dazzled the audience by breathing fire and juggling swords. Then, finally, the moment arrived that Colt hadn't realized he'd been waiting for. The ringmaster returned to the center, his voice growing low and dramatic as he announced, "And now, all the way from the snow-covered forests of Siberia, the magnificent, the powerful, Hyperion, the Siberian tiger." Colt's heart skipped a beat as a massive tiger sauntered into the ring, its golden eyes flashing in the spotlight. Hyperion was unlike anything Colt had ever seen. The tiger's sleek, orange coat rippled over powerful muscles, each stripe as distinct and perfect as if it had been painted. Colt had read about tigers in discarded library books that sometimes found their way to the orphanage, but nothing could have prepared him for seeing a real tiger in person. As Hyperion padded forward, the audience fell into a hushed silence. The tiger's handler stood nearby, holding a rope and murmuring commands. Colt watched, wide-eyed, as Hyperion gracefully leapt through hoops and effortlessly knocked over a row of barrels with a swipe of his massive paw. After a few more impressive feats, the ringmaster called out to the crowd, "Would anyone enjoy a friendly game of tug-of-war?" The audience responded with cheers and whistles as the 3 strongmen returned to the ring, grasping one end of a thick rope, while the ringmaster tossed the other end to Hyperion, who caught it between his powerful jaws. In the floor between them sat a large tank of water. The ringmaster spoke again. "The stage is set. Who do you think will win? I must warn you not to place any bets. The outcome is always the same." He turned to the crowd with a grin. "Now, on the count of 3, everyone shout go. 1, 2, 3, go." The audience roared in unison. The strong men planted their feet and strained with all their might, while Hyperion held the other end, barely moving, his posture almost comically relaxed. The ringmaster grinned. "What do you say, folks? Don't you think these fine men deserve a bath?" The crowd laughed and shouted, "Give them a bath!" With a quick jerk, Hyperion tugged the men forward, sending them splashing into the tank. The audience erupted in laughter, and Hyperion released the rope, nonchalantly licking the back of his paw. The ringmaster continued to play to the crowd. "Now, tell me, does anyone here own a house cat?" Cheers answered him. "As do I, a darling named Tabby. Her very favorite toy is a feather on a string." Which got me thinking that maybe Hyperion should have one too. He pulled a lever, lowering one of the trapeze rings, now covered in pink feathers. With a few jerks of the lever, the ring began to bounce up and down, catching Hyperion's attention. The tiger crouched low, eyes locked on the ring. Just as Colt thought the ring was too high for Hyperion to reach, Hyperion made an impossible leap. From his high vantage point in the bleachers, Colt had the perfect view as Hyperion soared through the air, snagging the ring with both paws and tearing off a pink feather. Colt was mesmerized. As Hyperion finished his act and disappeared behind the curtain, Colt's fascination with the tiger only deepened. Other impressive acts followed, including an elephant that could throw a ball through a hoop, but nothing could take his mind off the tiger. Suddenly, a loud roar filled the tent as a strange, noisy car rolled onto the stage, puffing smoke and rattling the bleachers. The crowd gasped in amazement, but Colt found it agitating. The driver waved, and the car revved louder, making the air vibrate. Colt glanced over at Mistress Blythe, who was about 10 children down the row, distracted and not paying him any attention. This gave Colt a very bad idea. Without a second thought, Colt swung his legs over the back of the bleachers and dropped, his body hanging from what had just been his seat. He quickly scanned the wooden framework of the bleachers. Climbing down would be easy. After a few swings and a jump, he made it to the ground. Keeping low, he moved swiftly under the bleachers, weaving between beams and catching glimpses of the show through the feet of the audience above. The bleachers curved with the shape of the tent, forming a U-shape around the stage. Colt crept along as far as he could until the bleachers ended. He paused, assessing his options. If he stepped out from under the bleachers, he'd stick out like a sore thumb. Half the crowd would see him. The car was still overwhelming every other noise in the tent. Colt could sneak back now, and there was a good chance Blythe would never know he'd left. The kids sitting near him wouldn't rat him out. The orphans didn't all get along, and few were actually friends. But no one would dare tell on another child. Life was hard enough without turning the other orphans against you. As he considered his options, Colt's eyes caught a spot where the tent material was heaped up like a rumpled blanket. Taking the opportunity, he quickly crawled underneath, relieved that the heavy canvas muffled the roar of the car. Flattening himself, he wriggled toward the outside until he reached one of the stakes, holding it down. Feeling for the next stake, he realized there was just enough room to squeeze through. Lifting the canvas slightly, he saw daylight, and after a few more scoots on his belly, he managed to peek outside. Seeing no one nearby, he took a deep breath. It was now or never. Rising to his feet, Colt found himself on the other side of the tent. The music and laughter from earlier was gone, replaced by a quieter buzz of activity behind the scenes. This area was noticeably bare. No decorations, no attractions. Only smaller tents and wagons serving as the performers' transient homes. From inside the tent, he heard the sound of the car shut off. He knew the show wouldn't last for much longer, and he was tempted to crawl back under the tent and return to his seat. But just then, 2 men came around a smaller tent nearby. Instead of darting for cover, Colt decided to walk confidently as if he belonged. His bluff seemed to work, as no one gave him a second glance. Navigating between a group of workers unloading crates, Colt suddenly heard a familiar roar split the air, the tiger's roar. He followed the sound to a large wagon, careful to avoid the workers bustling back and forth. It was easy to blend in among the crowd, who either didn't care he was there or assumed he belonged there. He wasn't sure which, but it didn't matter. Then, he spotted Hyperion's striped form and froze. But this time, the tiger wasn't leaping gracefully or basking in applause. Instead, Hyperion was crouched low in the straw, his golden eyes downcast, his shoulders hunched. The powerful creature Colt had admired moments ago was now a shadow of itself, forced into submission. The tiger's head was lowered, not in playful obedience, but in cowering fear. Before him stood the ringmaster, his once friendly smile twisted into a cold sneer. In his hand, he held a hot iron poker, the tip glowing orange, the air thick with the acrid smell of scorched iron. "Back in your cage, beast," the ringmaster hissed, thrusting the poker toward Hyperion, who flinched, retreating into a cramped cage. Colt's heart pounded as he watched the tiger obey, its magnificent form reduced to cowering under the man's threat. Colt clenched his fists, anger flaring inside him as he realized the ringmaster was enjoying the dominance the hot iron gave him, forcing the animal into submission. Colt felt a helpless, burning rage. How could anyone mistreat a creature so beautiful? How could something so powerful be controlled? The tiger's expression reminded Colt of the blank looks he often saw on the other orphans, hopeless faces defeated by Mistress Blythe's wooden rod. For a moment, Colt understood the tiger, a creature trapped, forced into a life it was never meant to live. Then a strong hand suddenly clamped onto his ear and twisted painfully. "Just where I thought you'd be," Mistress Blythe hissed, dragging him backward by the ear. Her earlier show of patience with James was clearly over, and she was now in full reprimand mode. His neck twisted painfully as she yanked him toward the tent, forcing his gaze toward the ground. But even as she pulled him away, Colt twisted his neck against pain for one last look at the tiger. Hyperion was locked in his cage now, alone, the ringmaster and hot iron gone. The majestic creature was reduced to a solitary, defeated form, and just before Blythe pulled him out of sight, Colt caught one last glimpse of the tiger's glowing yellow eyes, staring back into his own. Gray, the stone walls of the Bright Stars orphanage loomed cold and unyielding as Colt was marched inside, Blythe's hand clamped tightly around his wrist. The warmth, color, and excitement of the circus felt like a distant memory. Here, there was only the harsh echo of Blythe's heels striking the stone floors, and the dim, cheerless light from narrow, barred windows high on the walls. The building was never intended for children. Some of the kids said it used to be a hospital. Others theorized it was an old military fort. But Colt knew exactly what it was before, and what it was now: a prison. While the other children made their way to the cafeteria for soup, Mistress Blythe escorted him down the dark hall to the cell, the most feared room in the orphanage. A room with no bed, no chair, no books, and no windows. Nothing but an iron door. Colt was shoved inside, stumbling forward onto the hard floor. He made no effort to lift his gaze as Mistress Blythe spoke, her voice cold and final, breaking the silence for the first time since she'd grabbed his ear behind the circus tent. "No sunshine for 1 week," she declared. "You will receive 1 meal a day, and your latrine will be retrieved, cleaned, and returned once a day. When you're released, you'll scrub the dormitory floors, the cafeteria floors, the tables, and the chairs. Then you'll take on bathroom duty for a month. Do you understand?" Colt continued to stare at the floor as he managed to mutter, "Yes, Mistress Blythe." He had no idea if it was night or day. No matter how he lay on the cold floor, there was no comfort every way he turned. His bones pressed painfully into the unforgiving stone. He couldn't keep track of time, but after what felt like forever, exhaustion began to take him. He wondered what the other kids were doing, what they might be talking about. He longed for a book, for light, for company, but he knew none of it would come, not for a week. His mind drifted back to the circus, to the trapeze performers who looked so free, swinging through the air. He wondered if they ever swung just for the fun of it. One by one, he remembered all the things he'd seen that day: the candy, the bright colors, the marching band, the fire, the swords. But it was the eyes that stayed with him most. The fear in James's eyes when he knew that his fear of heights hadn't mattered in the slightest to the mistress. The pity and discomfort in the wealthy girl's eyes when she'd looked at him. And the golden eyes of Hyperion, the despair in those fierce caged eyes. He thought of the tiger until finally sleep overtook him.